President John F. Kennedy is often regarded as one of the greatest presidents in American history, but is that because of what he did in office, or out of sympathy after the heartbreak that the nation felt on November 22nd, 1963? Well, we're going to find out. But first, if you share my interest in U.S. history, please subscribe to the channel, as it is the best way to support the hard work that I do for these videos. And now, let's jump into it. Let's start with the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. It was one of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War, and President John F. Kennedy's leadership is often praised as masterful. The crisis began when American spy planes discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being built in Cuba, just 90 miles from the U.S. coast in Florida. These weapons posed a direct threat to American cities, raising fears of nuclear war. Instead of rushing into military action, Kennedy carefully weighed his options and chose to impose a naval blockade, which he called a quarantine around Cuba. This move stopped Soviet ships from bringing in more missile parts and sent a strong but measured message to the Soviet Union. At the same time, Kennedy kept channels of communication open with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, balancing firmness with diplomacy. Behind the scenes, he worked with his advisors to consider every possibility, from airstrikes to secret deals. In the end, the Soviets agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for an American pledge not to invade Cuba, along with a secret promise to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey. Kennedy's calm judgment prevented the crisis from escalating into nuclear war, proving his ability to handle immense pressure. Kennedy did not want Cuba or the Soviet Union to know that he discovered the creation of nuclear missiles, so he met in secret with his team for roughly a week before taking action. The Cuban Missile Crisis is often remembered as a moment when Kennedy's leadership saved the world from catastrophe. The Bay of Pigs invasion in April of 1861 was a major failure for the United States and a huge embarrassment for President Kennedy. The plan had been developed under President Eisenhower and was handed to Kennedy shortly after he took office. It involved training Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Fidel Castro's communist government. The U.S. hoped that the Cuban people would rise up against Castro once the invasion began, but that expectation turned out to be wrong. When the exiles landed at the Bay of Pigs, they were quickly overwhelmed by Castro's forces, who were well prepared and had a strong public support. Kennedy chose not to provide direct U.S. military support, fearing it would start a larger war with the Soviet Union. As a result, the invasion collapsed within 3 days, and over 1,000 Cuban exiles were captured. The disaster damaged Kennedy's reputation early in his presidency, and made the U.S. look weak in the eyes of the world. It also pushed Castro closer to the Soviet Union, setting the stage for future conflicts. The Bay of Pigs invasion is remembered as one of America's most poorly executed Cold War operations. Before I dive into the tragedy of November of 1963, let's talk about how charismatic Kennedy really was. In the 1960 election process, the Democratic Party was underwhelmed by their options. It wasn't for lack of choices for the Democrats, but rather the options were just not that exciting. That was, until late in the process, when a young, charismatic 46-year-old U.S. Senator from Massachusetts announced his campaign. Kennedy got the nomination, but in the general election against another young man, Richard Nixon, it was close. The first televised debates allowed Kennedy to show his calm, charismatic self, while Nixon was in shambles. Kennedy won that election by a close margin, and on Inauguration Day 1961, he became the youngest man ever elected president, replacing the oldest, Eisenhower. His most popular lines are, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country," as well as his Rice University speech, challenging his nation to go to the moon within the decade. Many agree that Kennedy is the most charismatic president in American history, which is what made his assassination so devastating. The assassination of President Kennedy on November 22, 1963, was one of the most shocking events in American history. Kennedy was riding in an open car through Dallas, Texas, when he was shot and killed in front of thousands of onlookers, and millions who later saw the tragedy on television. The accused assassin was Lee Harvey Oswald, who was arrested shortly after shooting, but was himself killed 2 days later by a nightclub owner, Jack Ruby. Kennedy's death left the nation in a deep mourning process as people admired his youth, charisma, and leadership during critical times. His assassination also created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty during the tense years of the Cold War. Vice President Lyndon Johnson was quickly sworn in aboard Air Force One, ensuring stability in the government. Many Americans struggled to come to terms with the sudden loss, leading to countless theories and debates about whether Oswald acted alone. The Warren Commission was formed to investigate the case, and while it concluded that Oswald was the lone man behind it, doubts and conspiracy theories still remain today. The complexities and conspiracies of the Kennedy assassination is beyond the scope of this video. Kennedy's funeral, marked by his young son saluting his father's coffin, became a symbol of national grief. The assassination not only ended a promising presidency, but also left a lasting scar on the American people. Thank you for watching this. I hope you are inspired by the passion and character of President Kennedy.